Awesome. You guys are you're in a good spot for being here today. So bear with me while I try to read this without my glasses. Charlie is the son of a U.S. Army Air Corps Pearl Harbor veteran who retired as an Air Force Master Sergeant in 1947. In 1967, Charlie joined the Navy. In 1968, graduated from Arizona State University with a Bachelor of Science in Political Science. He began flight training in Pensacola, Florida that March and received his Navy Wings of Gold in 1969. Charlie flew the Grumman A-6 Intruder during 2 combat cruises to Vietnam while assigned to Attack Squadron 196, VA 196, aboard the USS Enterprise, CVN 65. In the summer of 1975, while serving as an intruder instructor pilot, Charlie received orders to become a catapult and arresting gear officer back aboard the USS Enterprise. He retired in 1993 as a commander. Please give a warm Warhawk welcome to Charlie Taylor.
Thank you so much. Well, first I want to thank everybody here for inviting me back from my talk a couple of years ago. I also want to thank Brad and Rita Foltman for their support and being wonderful friends. It's a typical military friendship. You get together, you haven't seen each other in a while, and we kick right off. And I want to thank my wife very much for putting up with me for 42 plus years, and thank you so much. So I'm kind of going to sneak around here and look at the screen so I can see what I'm looking at. So that picture I took in a KA-60 tanker overhead the ship while I was flying, and I had a camera and nothing was going on, and that happened a lot in a tanker. But that is what I call 100,000 tons of diplomacy. That's what aircraft carriers are. They can go anywhere in the world. 5,000 sailors and men, now men and women, are deployed. They go aboard a ship, they deploy for 9 months to over a year. They're away from home. They spend as many as 100 days plus at a time at sea working. They have some safety stand-downs to recover, but the typical day for flight ops is 16-hour days. You start 4 hours before the first flight, and you finish 4 hours after the first flight. If something's broken, your day just got to be a little bit longer. And that happens with the air department and the aviators and the maintainers on the ship. Regular ship's company, 12 on, 12 off, as I used to call it, half day. So that picture tells 1,000 words. I will go to the next slide. And that's a picture of yours truly now doing some of the things I like to do, which is going out to meet schools and talk about aviation. We talk about STEM. And this particular shot was in Petaluma, California. And you notice the guy to my right is kind of costumed up. And we're going to talk about him a little bit later. But education is the first effort of our museum, and we try to put a lot of emphasis in that. We also recognize our veterans, and we are part of, just like you are, the Veterans Oral History Program. We've got probably over 500 that we've interviewed over the years, and those all go back to the Library of Congress. You can access those, and you can put in a name. If they're in there, you'll find them, and you'll see their video from their interview. I need a push on this is a video. I'll tell you the story about the video when we're finished, but it's a real short one.
Dreams take flight in one of the country's premier aviation museums, the Pacific Coast Air Museum in Santa Rosa. Get hands-on with the museum's rare historic aircraft and learn about our nation's aviation history. Find out more at pacificcoastairmuseum.org.
Okay, well that film, I had my granddaughters are in that shot on the F4, and my youngest granddaughter was about 7 at the time, She was all thrilled and excited about being on a video that was gonna, because she had this dream or thought that she wanted to be an actress. We spent 4.5 hours on that shoot. 13 seconds of commercial. So she rethought the whole idea of being an actress. So that's Whidbey Island. Those are brand new A6Es, the very first airplanes that came after the A6A. They were all digital, everything worked, no more tubes or things. And that was a flight of those aircraft, sequentially numbered, flying over the Deception Pass Bridge. It earned the name of Conception Pass Bridge, and I just did the numbers here recently. We crossed over that bridge, and 9 months later, we had twins. That's yours truly in his A6, his trusty A6. I got the number 13. It was assigned by seniority in the squadron, so you see where I was in the seniority. But that was me. I thought at the time, by 1975, I thought I was a pretty good pilot. I'd been flying a long time in that A6. But the detailer tells me I'm going to sea duty, and he says, you need to go to a 3-week school in Lakehurst. I said, Lakehurst. Oh yeah, that Lakehurst. So that was kind of an arbinger of where I'm going. I'm going to work on the most dangerous, it's been called the most dangerous place in aviation to work, and that's an aircraft carrier flight deck. Woe is me. That's my experiences. I had a couple of experiences on catapults while I was flying. One in the training command. About a week before I got my wings, every carrier pilot, every Navy aviator has to land on a carrier. So that's one of the requirements. This was my last effort to go and get I would have my wings a week later. So I'm on the carrier, something happens, we'll talk about it later, but it was pretty traumatic for me. And then almost 2 years later, again, yours truly is in an A6, and something very traumatic happens again. If we have time, I'll talk about both of those. That's Lakehurst, New Jersey. Those are big blimp hangars. That water tower is just a normal city water tower. There's one not far from here. I just saw it and mentioned to Brad. We're going to talk about that water tower. But that tells you how big those hangars were. Our classrooms were on the 3rd deck, as we call them. Right up in there. There were offices and classrooms, and that's where we went to school for our 3 weeks to learn all about catapults. Huge place. The blimp had crashed, or the dirigible had crashed about a mile from there. I walked the grounds to see if I could find anything. Nah, there wasn't anything there. That's inside the hangar, and that's a miniature flight deck that was there for the aviation bosun's handlers to learn how to move aircraft around, taxi them, give them taxi signals. They had T-34s there that would run up the A4. They would teach them how to tow it around, but that was part of their A school, going through basic training as handlers. That was my roommate, pretty handsome guy. I called him Omar Sharif. He just had that look, and his dad was a firefighter at Los Angeles County, and he had gotten the best degree I'd ever heard of. If I'd have known about this, I would have probably done it. He got a degree in industrial arts. I called him, that's a degree in handyman, because he could fix anything. He knew everything about cars, boats, aircraft, you name it, he knew about it. So we're going to talk a little history about aviation, and that's the very first carrier landing. That was a ship at anchor in San Francisco Bay. 8 years after the Wright brothers flew their first aircraft. So the Navy had the idea right away, this might work, this might really work. What you see, I see is there's nobody there helping him land. He's pretty low, and if you look at the wingspan, it's wider than the deck is. If you look, there are sandbags and ropes. That's what's going to stop him when he lands. And sure enough, it worked. And there's the pilot, Eugene Ely, who was famous in the Navy, but I thought he was a Navy pilot. He wasn't. He was a Curtiss test pilot, or he was flying for Curtiss and a test pilot. His outfit there is pretty traditional for 1911. He had a 1911 football helmet on. That's what he was going to wear. He had gabardine pants, but he had the aviator leather jacket. He had that. You also see something wrapped around him, around his torso up there. Anybody want to guess what that is? Well, no, it wasn't the white stuff. Those are bicycle inner tubes, and that was his flotation if he had to go in the water. We made do with whatever we had. So after he had made that landing, they had invited him to lunch with the captain on the ship and his wife. And after you have lunch on a carrier and you just landed, what do you do next? He took the first deck launch off the ship. This is the guy that I talked about in the earlier shot. This is Mr. Fred Wiseman, and this is a month later with Curtiss, but Curtiss was flying a bunch of airplanes in the Bay Area. He decides he's going to take his Curtiss aircraft and fly mail from Petaluma to Santa Rosa. 17 miles as the crow flies. It took him 2+ days to get that far, but he made the first airmail flight. That's the very first numbered carrier built to be a carrier, and that was the Langley. That's a deck launch off the Langley because we didn't need catapults back then. That's the anniversary, the 100th anniversary of carriers from CV1 up to CV81. Well, 81, 79, and 79, 80, 81. So 79 is going to be the John F. Kennedy. It's in construction now. 80 is going to be the USS Enterprise. And the last one that's coming along is going to be Doris Miller. He was the steward on board one of the battleships in Pearl Harbor, who then, after he saved or moved his mortally wounded captain off the bridge, manned a gun. He'd never been taught, had the opportunity to shoot a gun. He manned the guns and started shooting back at the Japanese. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite airplanes for more than one reason. This is the RA-5, under the A-5 Vigilante. It was a heavy bomber, and if you can see, the bomb bay was between the two J-79 engines, the same engines that the F-4 had, but the bomb bay went right down the middle, and it was designed to deliver one weapon, a nuclear bomb. The other two containers in there were fuel tanks. Well, dropping a nuclear bomb in a high loft maneuver wasn't real practical if you weren't carrying nuclear bombs. So the Navy decided we need to do something else with this airplane. It's a really good airplane, it's really fast. So comes along, we have the RA-5C, which is a photo reconnaissance aircraft. They put cameras on it. It had heavy losses in Vietnam because it would fly across the target before the target was hit, and it would come back last and go back aboard it. So this particular one, we had a story that goes with it. We had a KA-6D right behind the JBD, the Jet Blast Deflector, and the A-5 is going to go take off. The catapult launches. The fuel tanks weren't attached. What does Newton's law say? Well, the airplane's going to go flying no matter what, and the fuel tanks stay right where they were. They came out the back. They hit the deck, ruptured, the afterburner ignited the fuel. Huge fireball. Well, the A6 that's right behind it's a tanker, and it's got a pilot. His name is Bob Wittenberg, and he had an F-105 Wild Weasel pilot in the right seat who had just come out to get a cat in a trap, so he could say he flew off a carrier. Bob looks over, and the F-105 guy, he says his eyes were this big, and he says, does this happen all the time? And Bob Wittenberg says, oh yeah, all the time. There's our slide for the handlers. yellow, fuel guys are in purple, and the equipment guys who are doing the launching and recovering are in green. That's a typical air department. You see the guys down in front with aviator glasses, they're the pilots. But that's the air boss, the mini boss, catapult officers, other assigned duties, and then the rest of the air department in all their rainbow colors there. Real quick on the catapult, huge receiver. I was looking around here. It's about the size of 3 Airstream campers, a sphere that could hold over 800 pounds of pressure, and that's where you had to build up. You had to hold that pressure to be able to launch the ship, the carrier. Real quickly, the steam would come up through the catapult. The spears are the double-barreled spears that go down the flight deck. They go from 0 to, depending on how fast the plane needs to be, 110 to 170 knots. At the end, they stop in 8 feet. They're literally dragging the aircraft. They pull the aircraft along right there. And that's what is going to launch it. They stop with the water brakes are on your left, and the end shot of those, it's a double-barreled shotgun, and what it looks like. The double-barreled shotgun are those spears. Each of those weighs about what a VW weighs. So everything on the ship system for aircraft are big. We had an 8-foot torque wrench that we used to do fine-tuning on things. And that's my wife in the background there. She didn't even know I had this slide. But anyway, that's at the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. I very much encourage people to see that one. Before we had the nose tow, and when we needed to start putting power to launch aircraft, we needed catapults. The original ones were steam. The planes had hooks designed, and we had to hook the catapult to the plane by hooks, those wires. It's called the bridle. The bigger the airplane, the bigger the bridle. So that's an 8.4. It was pretty small. That's what a nose tow looks like today off all the aircraft that are operating in the fleet right now. That little device is called a holdback, and it's got a design shear point that holds the aircraft in place after the steam starts to move. It doesn't let the aircraft loose until it hits that shear point. The A4, that was about 28,000 pounds. The A6 was about 36,000 pounds. And it went up the bigger the aircraft. So it just made sure that thing didn't start moving slowly. Repeatable holdback fitting came along. Now you don't have those little holdbacks. It's still got a unique fitting on the aircraft, so you don't use the wrong one for the wrong aircraft. But now we don't have to throw the fittings away. Weight. Launching an aircraft, weight is the most critical thing. You have fuel and you have ordnance on airplanes, so you have to know how heavy it is so you can set the steam correctly. They write with a grease pencil on the side of the airplane what the gross weight is. This young man comes up, or young lady today, and looks at that, dials in the number that's on the side of the aircraft, shows it to the flight crew. They give you a thumbs up, or if they want to go down or up, they tell you that. Then that gets shown to the catapult officer, who's then going to look at and figure out how much steam he needs, how much wind over the deck we have currently, which will affect how much steam you need. The more wind, the less steam you need. And he's got a deck operator. You're going to dial in down to the folks down in the engineering facility how much steam you're going to need to send up. So you give them that, and then you're going to monitor what's going on before you get ready to launch. I'm just going to tell a short story about this one. This is the waste catapult, and I call it center stage. The air boss is up there in what looks like a control tower. The captain of the ship sits right there in his big seat. And the admiral, when you have one, and most of the time you do, he sits in the right above in the corner seat right there. So everybody sees what's going on and what you're doing down there. That's the signal for the catapult officer to send. What you do is that when they run to full power, you're looking, the catapult officer is going to be waving like this, and if you need him to go into burner, he'll do that. And he looks at the pilot. When the pilot's ready, he's going to salute the catapult officer. The catapult officer is going to salute back, and then he's going to go down, touch the deck, and the signal to the guy on the side who's going to fire he's going to come back up. So the hand has to come back off the deck. A couple of reasons for that, and I'll talk about that maybe if we have time later. That's the deck edge operator. His hands are up because you don't want to know what his hands are doing. You know when he goes down with his hands, he's pushing the fire button. When he comes back up, you know his fingers are off the trigger, the button. So you're a little bit, and there's one that's just started. He's just launched. The plane just started moving. The arresting gear officer, we'll talk about that in a second, but you go back after you do the waste catapult duty. When the recovery is done, you go, when the launch is done, he goes back to be the arresting gear officer for that next recovery. And if everything fails, you have a barricade, which is another arresting gear engine, and you fly into a big nylon web. You're not gonna miss that. You're not gonna go anywhere. You're not gonna wave off unless they wave you off out beyond the safe zone, but you're gonna stop. Fresnel lens tells the pilot whether he's above glide slope or below glide slope, and the glide slope is that green datum light that's across, and when you're there, it's right in the middle. If you get too low, you know you're low. If you get real low, it's red, and the landing signals officers probably already waved you off, because that's really dangerous. That's another shot of a Vigi on a conventional carrier. Just look at that steam, that smoke. He's got to crank up a lot of speed and a lot of steam to launch that thing. And those on the Vigi, those are a pair of those bridles. That sometimes takes two guys to put that up on the hook and hold it tight until they go into tension, which is what they do before they let him go to full power. So blue water ops is when you're flying in the great blue ocean and there's no place else to land. Either no safe runways or bases, or just nothing there. In the Indian Ocean was a lot of nothing there. On this particular day, outside air temperature was 90 degrees. That means you're going to need a lot more steam to push the guy. And there's no natural wind. So the ship has to make all the wind over the deck itself. This particular day, the Enterprise, which has all kinds of cool things on it, first nuclear aircraft carrier, it's got all that stuff on the top going for it. But there's two reactors that are down for maintenance. So when they're down for maintenance, they have to drag a screw, and they're not feathered, so this is just going through the water like a little speed brake. So it's going to be a little bit of work to get that Vigi airborne. So here we are. I got a 75,000-pound aircraft. I look at the chart. I see how much steam pressure I need and how much wind over the deck I need. So we get the Vigi up there. I got my 720 pounds of steam, and I look and I don't have enough wind over the deck. The wind over the deck, what we're shooting for is launching the aircraft 15 knots above stall speed. That's what we want to do. That's single engine, or if he's got two engines, he has to make, he's only going to get 15 knots above stall speed with the normal operating aircraft. So he loses an engine, he's already behind the power curve. So I get the steam, I look down, the wind's not enough. I call up, because I could talk to the air boss. The air boss talks to the captain, and captain, thank goodness, can't talk to me. And I said, we need more wind. So it takes a couple of evolutions that he has to call the ship has to call the engineer has to create more steam. Okay, we got our steam, we got our wind over the deck. I don't have enough steam. We went through that three times, not enough steam, not enough wind. Finally, the air boss and the captain, I'm sure, decided to scrub the launch. This was the airplane that was going to go first on the launch, just scrub it. and then we're done. We break it down and we get ready for the next aircraft that's going to launch, because we got a whole bunch of airplanes getting ready to launch. And the last thing I hear is that my air boss says, the captain wants, when this recovery's over, because I'm going to the arrest again, the captain wants to see you on the bridge. Just words you don't want to hear. This is kind of the same scenario, but it's a week and a half later, and we have a new captain on the ship. We knew the captain on the ship from having been the XO. He was an ex-Vigi driver. His call sign was Old Magnolia. He was just a great Southern gentleman, and he liked to sing too. But we had 15 aircraft airborne. We got to land all those aircraft because we're still blue water ops. We have an RA-5C, another Vigi. He's going to launch first. So these jets that you see there, this is the waste cats. The jets that you see there weren't there, but the Vigi has to taxi out of that hole and come all the way over and turn onto the cat number 4. His nose, the pilot's going to be out over the water when he does that, because the nose gear is way behind him. I'm looking, I'm getting ready, and I see him come out of the spot, but he's not slowing down, he's going faster. He's not steering, nothing's, and I look at the pilot. He was a lieutenant commander, Navy test pilot graduate, so I thought the world of him, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and he just goes, we call that the reserve salute in the Navy. So, and sure, there was no stopping, he wasn't turning. That's where he ends up. The catwalk saved him from going in the water. When he went up, you notice the tail? The vented fuel ignited when it hit the jet exhaust. So we had a flash fire. They put that out right away, and the crash bosun got them out. They didn't eject. They didn't have really great seats back then either. So they got them, roped them out, and got them out of the cockpit. Now we're looking at the airplane, but we got 15 airplanes airborne. We're in the middle of nowhere. We got to recover. We have a foul deck line. I don't know if you can see it. It's right there. Anything sticking over that, you can't land aircraft. You're not allowed. You're not allowed to land them. Captain of the ship goes through the air boss and he says, tell me how close he is to that foul line. I just look real close and see how close he is. Well, he's a little bit over, boss, Captain. He says, I'll tell you what, we're gonna land the whole air wing. We'll leave him right where he is until the recovery's over, and we're gonna save this Vigi, because it was the last cruise of Vigis, and he'd been a Vigi CO, and he wasn't gonna throw it over the side, because normally that's what you would do. You would sacrifice one to save 15. We weren't gonna do that, and the captain's instructions to the LSO were, don't let anyone land left of center line. He says, do not let them land. Wave them off. So they recovered the entire air wing, and then recovered, got the chili out and craned that plane back and put it away. It had had a total hydraulic failure. You come out when you come out of being unchained to go forward, they give you a brake check. When he hit the brakes, nothing happened. When he hit the steering, nothing happened. He'd had a major hydraulic failure, and that was the issue with him. I'm going to talk a little bit about Navy attack pilots and carrier fighter pilots. Fighter pilots were famous during Vietnam for dealing with the catapult. When you did this, when they would salute, and they were looking for the cat arch to salute back, many fighter pilots would use a one-finger salute. So they didn't want to go flying, I guess. I don't know. But they were famous for that. So that kind of gave me some thoughts, because I'm a kind of a costume kind of guy anyway. So this was my image of what fighter pilots think of themselves. And my apologies to any Air Force fighter pilots. Everybody who flies a jet in the Air Force is a fighter pilot. So my apologies to you. This is between me and Navy fighter pilots. So that's what I think of them when we talk about fighter pilots. And when we talk about attack pilots, there's our lineage. The dive bombers, the Dauntless dive bombers going after the carriers, they were doing We did 45-degree bombs. They did like 80-degree dive bomb angles when they were dropping their bombs on the carriers. And then the movie Devotion is a Navy pilot flying a Corsair doing ground attack. There's yours truly, and a tanker pilot in the Gulf of Tonkin. And I had a costume that I would pull out of my helmet bag when we would get airborne, and I would join on Air Force KC-135s and fly up beside them with my outfit, and I'd be flicking my cigar, and they'd all come out, look at these guys, these crazy Navy pilots. So there's a couple of calls there I'll talk about later if we have time. There I am, that vision of me with the red beard, that's what I looked like in reality. We had the Epling brothers. They were 3 young men from Arizona, all brothers. They all were in our catapult crew, and they were cowboys. And we also had on the carrier for morale, welfare, and rec. We had a electric bronking, electric bull that the one of those you see at the bars. We had one, so that all the guys who were cowboys brought all this stuff on cruise with them. And he brought his whole outfit, and he says, I asked him if I could use it, and he gave me everything. He had his vest, his cream-colored boots, and I made the star. He didn't have a star, so I had to make myself a star. And there I am with a picture of him and me before the launch for the F-14's going home at the end of the cruise. So this is the last launch we're going to have at the end of the cruise. We had made our successful cruise and we didn't put an airplane in the water, so my roommate and I were very happy. I even had silver spurs on my cowboy boots when we launched them. So that's the first movement of the F-14 as he goes down the track. And I'm the captain. This was the new captain, so I'm sure I would have had another trip to the bridge if it had been the old captain, and I probably never would have done that. I'm going to click through these real quick, and then I'm going to ask if there are any questions or comments, and I'll try to repeat the questions if I can hear them. When the captain called me to the bridge, what did he say? Well, first, I thought I went straight to the air boss, because usually the air boss is going to come down there with you when you go see the captain. He had a chance to, he said, why don't you go on down there by yourself? So he wasn't going to get chewed out. So I come to the captain, and he said, well, why? What was the problem? And I explained, not enough steam, not enough wind. And the airplane, I didn't want to put him in the water. He was going to be, at best, 3 or 4 knots above stall speed. And that's way too close for me when we're shooting for 15. And he looked at me, and of course, he's the kind of guy who he's going to have the last word. He says, well, you tell that engineer to get his act together. So that's another captain on the ship, and I'm a lieutenant. I'm going to tell the nuclear engineer get his act together. So that was, thank you for asking. Yes, sir.
What year were you on the aircraft?
Well, I started in 71 during combat, and in these years as a CAT officer, I was there in 75 to 78.
I was 85, 89.
80, well, we're shipmates. Yes, sir.
I understand the Enterprise had 8 reactors.
Yes, 8 reactors.
I heard that it took 1 reactor to provide enough steam for the catapult. Is that true?
No, they were all interlaced with each other because they needed redundancy. The reason they had 8 is it was the first nuclear carrier, and they didn't know how reliable they were going to be. Now, they have 2. They don't need any more now. But that one, and then this, and they do take them down for maintenance and work on them, but not usually during flight ops. Yes, sir. You know what? You and I were shipmates. I've got to talk to you. He was on in '74 when we first had the F-14s. That was their first deployment. We also had the first deployment of the S-3 Viking, which was an ASW aircraft. And that got a couple of stories to tell about those too, but I won't share them now. Yes? I think the question is how many electromagnetic catapults are in service? I think there's only one. It's the latest carrier that was built. I think the next 3 are probably going to be electromagnetic. I have some concerns about that. They're working now, they're working fine with F-18s. I don't know if they're going to work for F-35s. The F-35s, like the F-14, couldn't operate off any of our carriers until they all went through the yards and got those big giant 10-foot-high JBDs because of the way the F-14 launched with its nose down and its tail up. The old JBDs would have just been destroyed with that afterburner. So it's not unusual that they have to have a modification to operate a new aircraft off the carrier. But I think they're all going to be electromagnetic from now on. Any other questions? Oh. One more time. The carriers operate with an armada of ships, and we always have a plane guard at night. We always have one trailing behind the ship, right in the wake of the ship, which means he's a little off glide slope but you can see him at night. But there's always a destroyer there, it's called the plane guard. We always have a helicopter that's a plane guard. We don't operate without a helicopter in the air. Yes? Well, that's a good question. Can you, when you're flying over the carrier, can you figure out or estimate how fast he's going through the water? It's kind of it's not really an accurate way to do it, but you can see how much water, white water he has going behind him, so you know how hard he's working. But they always turn into the wind, if there is wind, because that saves you not having to go that much faster in the water. But that's a good question. So was that aircraft recovered? They did recover it back on the flight deck. Was it repairable? I'm pretty sure it was. It didn't have any major damage. They would have gone over all the especially the hydraulic system. They would have gone over everything, drop checked it, made sure everything was working. If they couldn't, then they would put it down in the hangar bay, leave it there until they got it to shore someplace where they would have professional civilian folks who could fix the plane. But good question from an Army guy. Good. The other thing, we used to drive people crazy, and most aviators call it the boat, and the Navy has ships. We would all just call it the boat because we like to aggravate guys. Yes, sir. Well, in my combat cruise, Stephen Kuntz, and actually Stephen Kuntz was my roommate when we went to Lakehurst, New Jersey. He and I were roommates there. And Steve went to the Nimitz and I went to the Enterprise. So he went to the next nuclear aircraft carrier, the newest, the second aircraft carrier that the Navy had. Comments on Flight of the Intruder. When I talk about my Vietnam experiences, my last slide says, read and watch the movie Flight of the Intruder, because Stephen Kuntz, that is a very, very good book. And Steve would be the first to say, and I call the pilot, Jake, in in the book was Steve's alter ego. Is the pilot Steve wished he were, and it's probably the pilot most of us wished we were. So that's a good question. Do you know Steve? Uh-oh. Well, I'd like to meet you. I'll tell you the rest of the story. Any other questions? Oh. What was his name? Roger Dishru. I don't know him. Steve was a Top Gun guy, so I don't know him. I never met him. I never met a Vigi driver I didn't like. I never met an F8 pilot I didn't like. So my hat was off to all those guys. And I did once have a B-52 pilot at a bar. I used to spend some time in bars. Who said, you know, you guys fly off those carriers, you never have to land with a crosswind landing. And I said, you know, I never thought of it that way. I said, yeah, the landing area is 300 feet. I got to stop in 300 feet. And if I don't, I got to go around again. But I never thought about that. They always had the wind down the deck for us. But he didn't. There's some other stories there that go along. But I didn't buy him a drink. Any other questions? Uh-oh. I'll get you in a minute.
When you put the A3 or A5 on the hangar there, put your hangar,
Cannibalize the aircraft on the hangar bay? If you had to, we were discouraged to take all parts off, but I learned very early on in my A6 days is never ask the chief where he got the part. Sir.
If you're a large group of people, you know how to tell which one's a fighter pilot?
Oh, in a large group of people, how do you tell which one's a fighter pilot? I want to hear this.
Eventually he'll tell you.
Oh, yeah, he will tell you. That's a good one. I like that. It's neutral. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
When were you at Lakehurst?
I was at Lakehurst. Well, you might have been my instructor. I was at Lakehurst in November '75. Got to go to the Army-Navy game in Philadelphia.
Well, I was there twice for AG.
Okay, yeah, so arresting gear school, huh?
No, weather.
Oh, weather, AG. Okay, thank you. We used to call you guys weather guessers.
Yeah.
When we were nice, we would call you weather guessers. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Navy aircraft had ejection seats ejected downward.
What Navy aircraft had ejection seats that ejected downward? I don't think any had. To my knowledge, none. We had jet aircraft, and I just talked to somebody here just before. We had the A3 that had no ejection seats. They had to bail out through a chute at the bottom of the aircraft. So when they were down low, they weren't going to make it, or it was called the A3D before the DoD went to the new designations. A3D was Douglas is what it standed for. A was attack because it was a heavy bomber also. And A3D, we said that means all three dead because they weren't going to survive. The B-66 that the Air Force had ejection seats, and I know the B-52 ejected some folks down, and maybe the B-66, I'm not sure. F-104? That's why I wouldn't want to fly those. I loved that airplane too as a kid. I watched those fly out of Luke Air Force Base. They were training the German Air Force pilots. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. All you carrier sailors. We'll have you stand up so they know we're around. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I wouldn't be here without you.
You said that if you had time, you would talk about some of the other things. Do you remember what those were?
Oh, you're going to test me. Yeah. Well, the red beard, when I had the red beard, I had no idea I had red hair. I was blonde, and the red beard showed up, and it wasn't until our youngest granddaughter was born and she's a redhead. I said, oh, I guess the DNA was there all along. Let's see, what else was I going to talk about? Oh, the two accidents that I was involved in. The USS Wasp, F-9s, hydraulic catapults in the Gulf of Mexico. Two pilots going to hot seat. I'm one, and the guy in my squadron with me is in the other airplane. We're going out onto the flight deck, the engines are running, the other pilots get out and we're getting in. It's a race to who's going to be first up to the cat. Well, I'm a little bit slow and I'm a little bit deliberate when I'm doing my stuff in the cockpit. So he gets to the cat first, and the JBD goes up. It's going to be a hydraulic cat. The cat fires, the plane goes straight into the water. He perished. The story, and both of these accidents are long. You talk about chains, breaking a chain in an accident and they don't happen. This one, the F-9 taking off on a long runway, you had to hold the nose down until you got the flying speed, and then you pulled it back. If you'd let it come up on its own, you'd never get airborne. Our landing signals officer forgot to tell us that don't put the nose down. And the Wasp had not flown F-9s off the ship, so they weren't familiar with where the tail was supposed to be. Because you could see, I could see as a cat officer with an F-4, I could see if his tail was in the right place. And you would give him a jiggle to make sure he's checking his stick that he's got it in the right place. So that was one. The other was a KA-60, me, a pilot, launched off running from a typhoon, black night, no horizon. The ship had been in port, rained on for 7 days. We never had any care quals before we went out. I landed. The plane that they were going to have me fly had just come in with no pitot-static system working, and they're going to launch me off. They did the checks. We go off the cat. I watched my altimeter. It's set at 65, which was convenient because that was the flight deck level. It goes backward. And we get to the end of the cat, and all I see is, on my attitude, is sky. We pitched up. Now I know, because having served on the Enterprise later, when the ship comes out of a rain, their pitot-static system is all screwed up too. So we got way too much in speed when we got to the end, and the plane is trimmed to just fly just a 4 degrees angle attack or 20 degrees angle attack when it comes off. It just went ooh like that. I pushed a couple of times to get the note. We were starting to shudder and roll over. I used to brief, every time I briefed I'd fly. If we have to eject, I'm going to yell eject, eject, eject as quick as I can. And if you hear the third one, you're by yourself. And my BN who finally admitted to me, he says, Charlie, I never heard the first one. He was already gone. They picked us up in a helo. The swimmer came down, but they got me first, so they got me in, and I didn't know whether he was alive or dead. I had no idea. So we go back and hover, and in he comes. He had gotten pulled down by the parachute. We had a shroud cutter that we carried right up here so we could get to it, and he had hacked away at the parachute cord that was around his leg, and he came in. He no longer had the parachute, but he no longer had the lower part of his flight suit, and his boot was all chewed up too, but he got out. Okay, anybody? Is that it? Thank you, guys.
Take your time. I grab here. Yeah. Thanks. And here's a coin for you too, Charlie, on behalf of the world. Wonderful. Thank you, sir. That was great. Can we get one more round of applause for Charlie? Thank you, sir. That was awesome.